Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. And welcome to session 2. For those I might not have met, I'm Ian Lesser from the German Marshall Fund of the United States in Brussels. And it's a great pleasure to moderate this session where we're going to talk about something that we already started to talk a little bit about in previous sessions, but to focus on much more directly, and that's reinforcing partnerships in the South, a renewed strategic outlook. We have a lot of speakers with us, and which is great, but I don't want to say too much, but simply to say, and we were talking outside at coffee a bit about this, especially to be here in Rome and talk about this theme is important because historically, I think you would agree that with some variation, the strategy looking south has always, in a sense, taken a back seat. It's been in some ways a subordinate theater. The partnerships have been very prominent, but the question of strategy remains open. NATO has made some recent attempts to try to articulate a more explicit strategy looking south. We'll see in the summit in Washington this week whether more comes out of that. But clearly, simply talking about it in terms, in my view, of a 360-degree approach where everything is an equivalent problem doesn't quite capture the nature of this challenge across a very, very broad theater, if we're thinking from West Africa to the Gulf and even beyond. We have a wonderful group of people with us today to have this conversation, and I'll just introduce them to you very, very briefly. Ahmed Massadeh, former Secretary General, Union for the Mediterranean, in One. Ambassador, thank you for being with us. Abdulaziz Sagar, who is President of the Gulf Research Center in Jeddah, who is with us virtually, I think. And Sheikh Fawaz Meshal Al-Sabah, former Assistant Undersecretary, National Security Bureau in Kuwait. Thank you for being with us. Sergio Piazzi, Secretary General of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean. Thank you. And Maria Luisa Fantapié, who is the head of the Mediterranean, Middle East, and Africa program at EI here in Rome. A great group. I've asked them to be quite brief because there are quite a lot of people, but we're going to have a bit of a conversation here, and then we'll have time to open it up to all of you. So, Ambassador Massadeh, perhaps if I could start with you to offer us 5 minutes of thoughts, reflecting a little bit on your experience, but also what's happening today and what it might mean. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I would like to thank our hosts for inviting us today and having us join this very important meeting. Let me start by trying to link the narrative that we had over the past maybe 40, 50 years with the articles of the North Atlantic Treaty, with the events that are unfolding in my region. And I would like to speak to you my mind out, and I'm speaking, probably these are the thoughts of the people in my region at the political level and also at the layman level. In particular, I'm talking about Jordan, my country. And this is why I'm saying this opening remark. I mean, let me, in the light of that we are having a NATO summit tomorrow in Washington, let me remind everyone of Article 1 of the North Atlantic Treaty of 1949. This is a reminder of the commitments of the member states of NATO to settle international disputes in which they may be involved by peaceful means in such a manner that international peace and security and justice are not endangered. And I would like to underline that piece about international justice not being endangered. And of course, such norms were echoed in the UN Charter, in the EU treaties, in other international forums. And if I may, the Western principles, mainly resulting or relating to human rights, i.e. the rights to life and liberty, freedom from slavery and from torture, and also the protection of human dignity, has all evolved as the Western narrative that has been given to other parts of the world. This is the narrative that post-World War II has been given to the world, especially in my part of the world. Now, with the events that unfolded over the past 10 months, in particular in Gaza, I put the question to NATO member states and to this distinguished audience, what is left of the universal value system that has been created and advocated by the North and the West and taught to and preached to, as you like to call us, the South? And I'm asking this question in light of the title of the session that we have, how to augment and strengthen partnership with the South. And the ambassador of Macedonia asked a very important question. What shocking event do we need from the South in order to be engaging more? And I answer the ambassador, I don't see him, but I answer him, what more of a shocking event do you want to have other than what happened in Gaza over the past 10 months to engage? According to UN statistics, 35,000 people killed, women, children, elderly. 100,000 people are injured, handicapped, famine, destruction, total destruction. And so we are still inquiring about what events do we need to have the member states of NATO, and I'm not talking about the institution itself because I know that we are always faced with the answer that NATO is a security institution and we don't deal with politics or with humanitarian issues, but I'm talking about the member states of NATO. What else do you want to engage and to end this war which took place over the past 10 months? I'm sorry to say, also to be very blunt, I think that by not acting or by acting in a gray way or gray zone, in a way or another, NATO member states would be, if I may use the word, complicit in what has happened in Gaza over the past 10 months. And I give you the example of, explain to me the Biden administration accepting to have a truce of 5 days in order to free the Israeli hostages, but refusing to have a permanent ceasefire in order to resume the killing of the Palestinians. In other words, I mean, the simple answer for that would be is that Israeli lives matter, but Palestinian lives do not matter. And so basically we go back to the universal value system that was created by the West and was given to us in the region, that these are the norms, human rights, freedom and liberty and democracy, the free world, as we heard Alessandro Minotto Rizzo this morning say it. But I'm asking you again, what is left of this system? I will end here so that maybe I will have another part, about way forward, what is happening next. So I will finish my intervention at this point.
No, thank you very much for that, and we'll absolutely come back to those issues, because clearly, even before the current crises, I should say, actually, in the region, there was always this question when one spoke to partners in the South about, well, what is NATO's strategy looking south? What are you trying to do beyond the partner? What is the driving spirit behind it? And obviously the current conditions make that an even more difficult question to answer. So we'll come back to that. Thank you very much. Abdulaziz Sager, I hope you're with us by electrons. Yes? No? Okay. Well, we can come back to Abdulaziz when we get him online. So in that case, if I could turn to you, Sheikh Fawaz Mashal Al-Sabah, for your thoughts briefly, and then we'll come back and have a conversation.
Well, thank you, but after this great speech, I don't think I will be able to match the heat that's coming out from the frustration, which was reflected beautifully by my colleague from Jordan. And it just shows that we in the region sometimes see things differently than how you see it when you're across the Mediterranean, or as you call us, from the southern flank, or the southern eastern flank, or whatever flank you want to call us. But first, let me begin just by thanking our generous hosts. I feel honored to be here today. The Italians go all the way with their generosity and hospitality that even the weather makes you feel at home here. So that's really good. Special thanks also to Ambassador Nato, whom I met back in September 2004 when he visited Kuwait to present the ICI. And I was a junior guy at NSB, and that's where my journey with NATO began. I had a lot of things written down, but I'm just going to reflect on what I learned during my journey with NATO. As I oversaw during my 19 years experience with NATO, the NATO ICI Regional Center, amongst the different things that I've done. But I'll take you back to 2004 when our first visit to NATO, where it was very clear at the time for us and the visiting delegation that NATO's implementation of ICI was not very clear. We came 2 months after Ambassador Minato Rizzo's visit, and then we understood that practical cooperation was the basis of this relationship. And the third thing that we came out with was that it was a bilateral initiative, so a 26+1. There is no multilateral approach. So it's NATO and a single country. So when one of the questions that was asked was GCC. Well, GCC is multilateral, so it's NATO +1. So we'll talk about the bilateral. I understood during this whole time that each country has done a lot with NATO, but on its own capacity, and after learning the different tools and ways of NATO. What I also understood that the NATO mechanism is very slow and takes a lot to get it. But nevertheless, the pinnacle of the relationship between Kuwait and NATO, if we're going to call it that, is the introduction of the NATO ICI Regional Center. It's a Kuwaiti initiative, 100%. We came to NATO and told them, well, this is a land that we want to do something with NATO, and it can be your gateway to the region. And NATO accepted, and at the Chicago Summit in 2012, the center was inaugurated. Approved, and then January 2017, NATO had its home in the region. Well, one of the things that we also learned is that there was no blueprint to implement the center. So how are we going to run it together? Kuwait and NATO. So we had to be innovative and patient. And we also went back to the basis of the relationship, which is practical cooperation. Fast forward to where we are today. I think that the center has been, to a certain degree, a success. More than 2,500 personnel trained and were at the center, and more than 90 plus courses and events, fully funded by NATO, by the way. All the courses that took place at the NATO ICI Regional Center was fully funded by NATO. Well, I'll stop here as I have a lot of food of thought, and I'll leave it for the discussion.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. And we'll certainly come back to that because both for MD and for Mediterranean Dialogue and for ICI, the Istanbul Cooperation Initiative, it would be interesting under the current conditions to ask, what should be on the agenda, which is not going to be the same as it was 20 years ago, obviously. We have Abdulaziz Sager with us online now. Abdulaziz, thank you so much for joining us. Maybe I can give the floor to you for
Thank you very
5
much.
minutes if you can. We hear
yeah.
you. We hear you.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
We can. I can. Yes.
Okay, very good.
We see you
Thank you
as
very
well.
much, and I would like to thank the organizer and Ambassador Rizzo, whom I know for many years. I don't want to say when, but I'd like to emphasize in few points here that in 2002, I started the idea of how can the Gulf countries cooperate with NATO during a conference which was organized by RAND at that time and NATO and the Reds Hotel in Doha. So I think I deserve a little credit of being one of the initiators of an important relation could be between the Gulf countries and the NATO organization. 2004, I was at in Istanbul at the summit when I attended, and then the ICI was announced as an initiative, which is very good. However, as a Gulf Research Center, we do publish a very important magazine called ARA, Views from the Gulf. And this month, our main issue was on the 20 years post-ICI. In other words, what did we get after 20 years with ICI? I think there is a different views in that subject. Now, 4 countries out of the Gulf have joined the ICI. 2 remains skeptical, Saudi Arabia and Oman. But at the same time, they have their own reason, maybe which need to be addressed differently. At the same time, I think the Gulf countries start looking at the subject that, from a NATO perspective, it has been received and perceived as a political initiative, neither as a security important initiative. What we are interested in the Gulf, of course, is to have a security agreement that can provide the necessary security that we need, because Gulf remains under specific and certain threat in the region, and so far there isn't a viable working security architecture that can really provide the necessary security in the region. However, keeping a good relation, Kuwait, they were so great by establishing the center, and I know from day one the national security in Kuwait have been really devoting a lot of time and effort. Also countries like UAE, Bahrain, Qatar, they all been very much committed to such things. Today, what do we expect? I think we do expect from NATO to have a different strategy when it comes toward what is called, on the NATO definition, the South, but I think it's very much linked to the North security. If the Gulf country remain very important in terms of energy supply and in terms of location, I think today NATO member countries are suffering from what's happening on the Red Sea as a security issue. So that shows the linkage security between the Strait of Hormuz and Bab el-Mandab and the Red Sea is very much vital for the NATO. So NATO maybe need to revisit their strategy according to the 2030 vision, which has been announced on the NATO side also. At the same time, I think doing some, the beautiful, I call it, list of the ICI, it's a training, it's a cooperation, but we have to move toward sharing of intelligence. Navy for us and maritime security is extremely vital for the region. And what we have seen is a lot of political position, talking, meeting, but not really moving toward implementation of viable an important security thing. I did last time in the conference that was organized by the NATO Academy Foundation, talked about what I call NATO Plus. And NATO Plus, in my opinion, if we can get the Gulf cooperation countries, the GCC, with NATO to reach a sort of an agreement framework between them where security umbrella could be provided, with one important issue I think need to be addressed in any sort of arrangement like this. I think NATO is worried about the expansion of its membership because they don't want to have a new member that will veto a decision of allowing another member coming into that one. In a simple language, I would say if the GCC country become a NATO plus as member, This will allow maybe Israel in the future to become also on the NATO plus arrangement with NATO, and this can provide a better security architecture in the region, since Turkey already is a member, from the region there. However, I understand the complexity, I understand the difficulty of addressing such an issue and getting a new member there. But if you want really to get a better cooperation in the Gulf side, you need to show a practical step and not only political willingness or a political dialogue. We need to move from a political dialogue to a serious structure of providing the necessary security umbrella that's required, because I'm not very optimistic about Gulf countries, whether it's Saudi Arabia, my country, or other country, that may reach a sort of an agreement beyond what has been discussed between and agreed between Bahrain and the US. I think it's going to be quite difficult, and the aim, because we do look at the threat in the region maybe slightly different than the way how you look at it, but maybe Bahrain is a good framework, but is not sufficient. It does not really provide the necessary agreement that we're looking for it in the region. Bahrain-US agreement was a good starting point, but however, it does not really provide for us what we are looking for in the region, that to have a real commitment from both sides. If you want a commitment from the Gulf, I think we also need a commitment from the NATO, sufficient commitment that can provide the security we're looking for. And I endorse whatever has been said by your first speaker from Jordan. I admire that. I think today maybe we have to go through another notion of rethinking. Democracy is failing, international organization is failing, values are failing. So, what do we need to rethink about? How do we provide security and safety for the people in the world and work, closer? And also look at the relation between an individual NATO country with the Gulf in terms of requirement for providing necessarily defense equipment that we need to defend our territory. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much, Abdulaziz. And you raise a number of very interesting points, but one of them, and it would be good to come back to this, is the question of how NATO maybe can do more with all of the very elaborate, in fact, very deep bilateral defense relationships that individual NATO member states have with countries in the South. I mean, how much of this can be captured for NATO? Should it be? But we can come back to that as well, obviously. If I could turn next to Secretary General Sergio Pazzi.
Membership is open.
For your thoughts, and also perhaps to say a word about the Parliamentary Assembly.
This video is about it.
I know.
So we are a different organization from the other which are represented here today. And I'm Secretary General of this Parliamentary Assembly, international organization, and I come from the United Nations. I was the one that in 2005, with Ambassador Minutorizzo, we had the pleasure to sign the UN-NATO cooperation agreement on support in humanitarian operation in time of peace. It was something which had started at the end of the Iraq-Kuwait war. I was the political assistant to Matti Ahtisaari, and we look at Operation Provide Comfort and how the UN would have never been able to deploy 60,000 staff to provide protection and humanitarian assistance to the population stranded in the north. That's the way we started. And that concept has advanced. As 20 years ago, this organization was established by the national parliaments of the Southern European and the MENA region, we started immediately, maybe because of my experience, a constructive cooperation with the NATO, both in shape, both with the Secretary General, but also with the new established NATO Southern Hub in Naples, which for us is a very valuable counterpart. And today, coming to a meeting of parliamentarians from 34 countries, and see NATO political officer, NATO officer in uniform coming and addressing our meeting, something which was considered a challenge a few years ago, today is a given, extremely well accepted, with a very interesting opportunity to exchange views. Said so, I would like maybe to show you the video, and after that, as we go also with question and answers, I can provide you some additional information what we are doing in the South, also with the NATO, among others, in a situation like the Sahel, Sub-Saharan, MENA region, Wagner, the Africa Corps, the Chinese, or the relation with the Syria, which are a priority for NATO itself. If we can proceed, please. Thank you, sir.
The Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean, PAM, is an international parliamentary organization. Established by the national parliaments of the Euro-Mediterranean region. It has 34 founding and associate member states and several candidate partner countries. Membership is open to Euro-Mediterranean and Gulf region countries and to those which have an interest and role in the region. PAM is the center of excellence and a unique forum for regional parliamentary diplomacy. The main objective of PAM is to forge political, economic, and social cooperation among the member states, find common solutions to the many challenges facing the region, create a space for peace and prosperity for people. PAM conducts its work through President, Bureau, International Secretariat, standing committees. The current Secretary General is Ambassador Sergio Piazzi. PAM's 3 standing committees cover political and security-related cooperation and regional stability, economic, social, and environmental cooperation, development, and partnership, dialogue among civilizations and human rights. PAM may also set up working groups, ad hoc committees, or special task forces. PAM Special Parliamentary Committee on Counterterrorism, PAM Economic Panel, PAM Academic Platform, PAM Woman Parliamentary Forum. PAM serves the parliamentary division of the 5+5 West Mediterranean Forum, Mediterranean Day. PAM addressed many issues of common interest: counterterrorism, confidence building, peace support, conflict resolution, Middle East peace process, mass migration, free trade and investments, economic integration, climate change, energy, human rights, dialogue of civilizations, interfaith cooperation, education, gender issues, etc. The main operational and coordination instruments of PAM in these fields are electoral observation teams, Cairo election mission, Istanbul election mission, Syria, Libya, Bosnia, and Herzegovina. The PAM holds its plenary sessions annually hosted by a member state to discuss the reports and draft solutions prepared by 3 committees. PAM Award to reward individuals, organizations, and institutions who have demonstrated a strong and visible commitment, outstanding achievement, and active promotion of PAM ideals. PAM was granted a permanent observer status to the General Assembly of the United Nations in recognition of its excellent work. PAM participates annually in the UN General Assembly with a high-level delegation. PAM participates annually in the WB-IMF sessions in Washington with a high-level delegation. PAM fully participates in today's regional and international ministerial and thematic debates regarding the main challenges and opportunities facing the region and the world. Member states
Thank you very much. You see, we are a strange animal, but different from other institutions, which are also parliamentary. We are extremely operational. We are present in the field. We operate also as a channel of information, for instance, between Damascus and Ankara, between Brussels and Damascus. We were part of the Abraham Agreement consultation processes. We are very active also in a number of issues where the country of the Gulf ask our assistance, like the software platform, how to get, and we were working with Tehran on that. And we work also very operational. We are the only parliamentary institution which is invited to the head of security services in New York. We were invited by Russian FSB at the meeting of head of security services. That's because we are very active on counterterrorism, extremely active on the link counterterrorism, international organized crime, and in this we cooperate proudly with NATO. We exchange a lot of non-classified information, but the last thing I can say about, I mentioned Sahel, Syria, Libya, the Chinese drone to Libya a couple of days ago, and so on. We are involved now in a process where we also want to benefit from consultation with NATO inter alia at the preparation of the Summit of the Future that will take place in New York on 22-23 September at the eve of General Assembly. It's an initiative by Secretary General Gutierrez, which built on 5 issues. One of them is the reform of the Security Council, the global governance, and we are working on the issue of trust and reputation. The other issue, which maybe we can come back later in the question, is the malicious use of artificial intelligence and innovative technology at the request of the Security Council. Thank you.
Ambassador, thank you very much. And you know, you mentioned a number of sort of functional issues in addition to telling us more about the work of the Assembly that are very much on the NATO agenda and in fact form part of this recent expert study on the Mediterranean, but we'll talk about that. Maria Luisa, if I could turn to you now to offer some thoughts from your perspective, but also maybe to pick up on something that we've already heard a little bit about from some of the previous speakers, which is how to look sort of to the south of South, if I like, you know, to look sort of to Africa, what new partnerships you could imagine NATO contemplating.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you for inviting me to this important event with distinguished speakers. Let me start by saying that we also have to link what we said in the previous session with what we are discussing now. I think that my sense is that we are facing an extreme challenge of sort of navigating a moment of shifting global order. So the two conflicts that we were both mentioned, so the Russian invasion of Ukraine on the one hand and Israel-Hamas war, which happened at the very a very short distance of time, somehow have had the impact of, on the one hand, the first conflict has brought back the world of Europe, let's say Europe itself, to a post-1945 moment. But at the same time, both the Israel-Hamas war as well as the Ukraine-Russia conflict has also unveiled that the global order is no longer 1945, and it's shifting, because we have seen in many occasions in the aftermath of this conflict that many countries have actually not shared with the so-called West and with the Atlantic Alliance the feeling that they should actually oppose Russia. So we have seen more and more South a sort of different way of engaging, of behaving and reacting vis-à-vis of Russia, sometimes coexisting, sometimes also continuing the relation, or even nurturing. I would rather have to say that while the Atlantic Alliance was very busy east after the invasion of Ukraine, actually Russia has tremendously consolidated south in several regions, I mean, from places where in the Middle East it was already present, but most important, I will say, throughout the African continent, and I will not have the time to list and how to substantiate this claim. But overall, I think that we need to somehow, like some say, deal with the war the way it is. So embrace these shifts in the global order and say, okay, to a certain extent, Russia invasion of Ukraine has brought us back to 1945, but at the same time, also, the world is changing. So, and the south of the world, the so-called south of the world, is asking, I think, the Atlantic Alliance to be heard and listened to. And I think that there are key steps that we need to undertake in order to lay the foundation for any cooperative partnership with the south. And I will summarize them. I'm trying to summarize it in a couple of ones. I mean, first of all, I think that we need to have strategic clarity, which we don't have. We don't have strategic clarity in the sense that we yet haven't made our mind whether we want to still, where we are open to deal with the South in some way, even if the South still deals with Russia. Are we willing to do that or not? So I think that we need to answer that questions, and I think that sometimes what has been voiced at first, which is this issue of the double standards, and that is very present, sometimes is not even an issue that points the finger against us in terms of like principles and value alone, is sometimes just a request of strategic clarity. Please tell us where are you heading to. So I think that first is a strategic clarity that we need to acquire. The second point, I think that we need definitely to understand the threat perception from the South, in the sense that threat perception from the southern neighborhood is different, perhaps, the way that we deal with threat perception, and there are also different ways of dealing with the threat perception. So first of all, the South, and I mean here we have a distinguished representative from the GCC. The GCC have been at the forefront of this embracing actually multipolarism. So saying, okay, we definitely are continuing and nurturing our alliance with the United States when it comes to security, but we also do want to continue relationship with other global powers. Second, I think that also coming back to the issue of the GCC, I think that there is quite an interesting combination of dealing with the threat with a combination of defense, which is much needed, as we heard from Dr. Abdulaziz, but also deterrence built through diplomacy and dialogue. So just mentioning the Saudi-Iran agreement deal, which has brought little results, but somehow it's a very interesting case study on how basically Saudi Arabia has lessened threat on its soul through dialogue and diplomacy with its former enemy. And I think that another element that it's very important is the fact that, especially in this moment where the region is basically torn with conflict, is that the general reaction of many of these states is to conclude bilateral security agreements, not necessarily to go multilateral. And here, the entire bilateral security agreements that are concluded from single Middle Eastern state, for instance, with the United States. So what is, I think, and then in the Q&A, I think we will have more time to unpack what we can do in this. I think it's, well, what has been mentioned, a first element, which seems sometimes, I think, neglectable because, you know, it's not necessarily practical and substantial, but is really the issue of political dialogue that was mentioned by Dr. Abdulaziz, in the sense that there is a lot of people-to-people diplomacy that needs to be invested in order to understand the way in which the South looks at the threat and responds to it. And I think that here there is a need for tremendous investment on this. Second, I think it's very important to pick on what has been said in the sense of, okay, there are some issues that we differ from, maybe the members of the Atlantic Alliance differ from some of the Southern partners on key issues, mostly also related to engagement with Russia, but there are certain things that we converge with. So let's actually start working on the things that we converge with, and one can be that one of maritime security. So and I think really the key for cooperative partnership with the South is really our ability to listen, but also to navigate and separate in some way where we differ from where where we can converge, and push forward on where we can converge. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And, we're going to open it up to all of you and welcome your comments and questions. And then I'll come back to the group here. Abdulaziz, if you want to come in, there is a way that if you signal to our organizers, they will tell me. So we can do that as well. And then I have a final thing that I want to ask you, maybe when we finish up, about, if you were to pick, but you can think about it. We've been rightly focused on the partnerships here, because that's the session. But there is a question about NATO strategy and what NATO is up to in the South. And, if you were to think about that for a moment, what is it? What really is it about this that's, whether it's existential or not, what should NATO be focused on in this region? How do you get it on the agenda to begin with? But anyway, we'll come back to that. Please, if I could, just right here, and if you would tell us who you are and where you're from, that would be wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It works, yes. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Brigadier Raggi. I'm Chair of Peace Operations at the Carabinieri Officers College in Rome. And I have a question for Mr. Mazadeh. Assalamu alaikum. And I'm very interested in Israeli-Palestinian issue. I have served 1 year in Khalil, Hebron, as a human rights observer, many years ago. And I realized how difficult is the situation. I could tell many stories, some of them very contradictory. But I would like to quote an interview of an Hamas representative we invited in our mission. I used to be part of the TIPH missions, the Temporary International Presences in the city of Hebron, where I used to be press information officer and even human rights observers and an analyst. We used to invite everybody, settlers, Hamas, and so on. And I remember this statement from an Hamas representative saying, every Israeli citizen is enemy. We must kill all of them, even children. It was 27 years ago. I could tell you this because it has taken more than 2 decades to arrive to the 7 October attack. I'm not elaborating, of course, on the outrageous death toll that the conflict has brought to us. It's evident to everybody, and it raises issues on international humanitarian law, protection of human rights, and so on. But my question is very simple. Do you think that there is a feasible and relatively easy way to bring the two communities, Israeli and Palestinians, on the same way, sharing a human rights approach to life, an effective one, considering that I have seen so many difficult situations. Consider 2 of our soldiers were killed by Zadin al-Qassam, and we had other situations I'm not going to mention. But they design a very complicated situation. Do you really think there is a feasible way? Not to solve the conflict. Solving the conflict, of course, will be the outcome. But talking about the same values that, as you mentioned, have been exported by the Western perspective of human rights. Thank you very much.
Ambassador, maybe this is a very specific question. Maybe we come to you just to pick up on that very briefly, and then we'll open it up again. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this question, and may I also reciprocate by saying that what you heard from the Hamas representative 27 years ago, we have heard them over the course of past 10 months from the Prime Minister of Israel and his right-wing ministers, that it is the right of Israel to kill every Palestinian and wipe them out. And this is why we are now at the ICJ with the genocide crime being advocated there. So basically, it's not just one party. I think it's both parties who have promised to, to act in this negative way. Just to answer your question, Look, I think that we had many opportunities, and the key element that we keep missing is that we do not have a proper political will to have a peace accord or peace treaty ending this conflict. I believe once we are put on track with a clear plan, with clear endings, with the engagement of the United States of America and the European Union and the international powers to end this conflict, then I believe that the values of people would amalgamate and come together. You know, we are now being captured in this hatred or hate and evil cycle that nobody is thinking properly and actually coming to the conclusion that I could tell from your question that it's unfeasible, it's not going to happen. Then what is the answer? The answer is more war and more crisis. And it's not going to be only within the Palestinian-Israeli area or dossier, but it's going to escalate and go to other regions in our region. And let me remind you that this issue is not just about the Middle East. It's not about Yemen or about Lebanon or about, you know, Sahel, whatever. It is about Europe. It is about the security of Europe and the security of NATO. And as long as we shed away, we look away from the elephant in the room that this matter has to end now, and there should be a recognition of a Palestinian state from all countries, like from Norway and Spain and Ireland, and I call on other member states of NATO. Why not recognize the Palestinian state? You recognize Israel, recognize Palestinian state, and have an ending with key indicators, key performance indicators with clear endings. I do believe then the value system that we are all worried about will amalgamate, will come together. I'm not worried about that, but we have to start.
Okay, thank you very much. Other comments, questions? Yes, just right here, please.
Thank you very much. I'm Dr. Emanuela Durmishi. I'm here as a member of security industry, but first of all, I'm a doctor, a psychiatrician, and for many years I've been a referent for migration in the scene. So I've seen in many years how the conflicts have grown up and how migration have grown up 5 times more from 70 till now. The question that I have is, in this moment, when the equilibrium is very weak, even between the NATO states, do you have the impression that NATO states inside them, they have really understood the importance of all states of the enlarged Mediterranean for equilibrium, economy, security, energy, and if these states, to the other sides, the states of the enlarged Mediterranean, have they have understood their importance in this equilibrium?
Okay, maybe we'll take a couple, and we'll come back to that very important question of how, is NATO as an alliance as a whole paying attention to this, taking it seriously? If I paraphrase, I think it's true. Other thoughts, questions? All right, I'm going to throw in one of my own, and we can come back in the 15 minutes or so that we have left. NATO recently commissioned an expert study on Strategy South, which it's very detailed and is very thorough. And it focuses, much as the session actually, largely on the partnerships and what could be done differently. I don't know how many of you have had a chance to see it. It has over 150 recommendations in it. So it's quite a detailed thing. I don't know how much of this will be picked up at the summit. Something, probably. And it has some real recommendations in it, to have a special envoy for the South, to do something different with the NATO hub for the South in Naples, to revive the multilateral political dialogue, all of these kinds of things. Let me maybe ask you, if you could all comment on this. In a sense, it's a combination of these two questions. A, is NATO taking the South seriously against the backdrop, obviously, of a war in Ukraine, in the East? And secondly, is there a serious effort underway to address that? What do you do about it? And it's about the partnerships in part, but it's not just. It's other things as well. Maybe I could start with you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Listen, up to a couple of years ago, our assembly became the main political sponsor of the Southern Hub. We were surprised sometime in Brussels, people did not know what the Southern Hub was. And we had the feeling that it was not taken seriously. And we could see it also from the fact how the Southern Hub works, is funded, and the secondment of the staff. From the south side, if I remember correctly, only Jordan had its liaison officer in Brussels visiting not so frequently the Naples Southern Hub. So it was a total unknown reality. As parliamentarians, we recognize the importance to exchange information, to associate more the South, for our delegates from the southern country not to be scared when you say NATO. It's an alliance of a group of countries which can bring some benefits. And also, when NATO was coming to brief us at the beginning, you know the mentality of the military, everything is confidential. And here you were talking in a civilian, political, open side. But eventually we managed to have an open dialogue, and at a certain moment we had a lady from Luxembourg, police officer working at NATO Hub, coming to talking about the risk in the Sahel, said, well, actually, every member of the terrorist group of the jihad cell working there has a mobile phone. And that's the way we can track what is happening. The discussion since then has deepened. I believe that NATO has realized the importance to follow what is going on in the Great MENA region, in Sahel, Sub-Saharan, also because the double head of the US commander and the Sixth Fleet, who was the double head in Naples. So there were a direct interest from the US in that, which has passed by capillarity into NATO. We have seen how poor the West was prepared, to be honest. And also we saw how the French lost ground very easily in the area, how the Russians, the Chinese were ready to come in. Just think the gold mines. The latest purchase of Iranian drones by Russia was paid with the 2 tons of gold coming from the Sahel. That was very easy deal. Not only that one, we can see also how the influence of Russia is moving. Wagner is still operating in some areas, now is Africa Corps, you have some Chinese security companies, but we see the influence, we see the chain of the coup d'etat moving from one to the other one. Luckily, Senegal managed to avoid it, but for us, they are all matters of extreme concern. In our plenary session, which took in Portugal a few weeks ago, we decided how we can relaunch to the parliamentary channel dialogue with those countries, which for us is extremely important, not to leave the door closed, and to see when there will be the opportunity. The same, speaking about Israel and Palestine. Possibly we are the only organization where today the PNC and the Knesset still sit together around the same table. And we had the meeting with the Guterres 2 months ago in New York, and we said what we can do to keep this door open and use it at the right time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Abdulaziz, we know you're there, and I wanted to turn to you for any thoughts on this question of NATO taking this seriously and what might it do?
Well, definitely we understand in the region how NATO is busy on the Ukrainian crisis. And we understand that this is a very serious challenge and it has taken a lot of the time and the effort and the focus and so on. But at the same time, I think neglecting the problem in the Middle East and North Africa will not help NATO, because this is the neighborhood, the neighborhood of the NATO. So it needs to be well addressed. It needs to be looked at. And I did participate in some of those reports that was done. I remember during the Munich Security Forum, there was a team. And I think I had a good discussion with them, and they asked me many questions with regard to the ICI and how do we see it from our part of the world. I think, in principle, the relation can work good because the Gulf countries are much more closer to the NATO member state and also to the NATO organization. We had the pleasure of the visit of the now is the former Secretary General of NATO, and we hope the new Secretary General will take place. And we wish him all the success in his new assignment. So the possibility of expanding and looking at in depth of the problem, how to be addressed. I mentioned maybe two of the issues which is important that need to be looked at: the sharing of intelligence and the maritime security. Probably I will add to that the energy security. I mean, I'll give an example, for instance, now the current situation on the Red Sea with the Houthi side. What we have seen NATO member states like the US and the British are targeting a naval capability of this Houthi, but not really doing more than that. And this is why the deterrent policy which was implemented by the two member state countries against the Houthi in Yemen did not work. Still they are sending their missiles because the source of supply coming out of Iran to them was allowed for a long time, that they have been able to receive all the missiles, all the drone, all the capability. They allowed them even during that time, despite of the Security Council resolution which was there, to prohibit any supply of weapon system to these rebels. So, I think revisiting, having a serious dialogue between the two sides, understanding the problem and how to deal with it, and the threat assessment, and then finding a proper formula, that they can work together in addressing some of those issues is extremely important. Our security is your security. When we had a problem in the Red Sea, you suffer. A lot of 17% maybe or 18% of the European goods, they have to go through the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandeb. So, the threat is equal, and the threat is harming both sides. And we have a common interest in fighting terrorism, fighting piracies, fighting extremism, and fighting a violent non-state actor. We should not allow a violent non-state actors to get away the militant side of it, to get away with what they want to do.
Abdulaziz, thank you very much. I'm conscious of our time, but I want to make sure we go to the rest of our panel here to get in an answer to this question, questions, but also the last word, if you like. Maria Luisa, maybe we can go to you next, please.
Well, I think I mostly agree with what has been said also by Abdulaziz, and we go back to this issue of trying to single out things that were, members of the Atlantic Alliance and members of the the South, the so-called South, can partner with. But I think that it's, I have been recently reflecting a lot, for instance, on how Rome, how Italy has been looking at this, because I just came back to Italy 9 months ago after 10 years abroad, and so I'm dealing for the first time, I have to say, with the Italian foreign policy. And honestly, if you look at the map, Italy is 1 hour flight away from multiple crises. We are not in a very good situation in general. And so I think that this is, and I've been thinking a lot on how, for example, Italy has been trying to address this issue of the Southern Partnership through the Mattei Plan. The Mattei Plan is a good case study to understand I don't think it's the response to all the questions we raise, because it has a lot of flaws that here we are not here to discuss. But still, it's a hint, I think, of that attempt of a southern member of the alliance to try to provide a different way of engaging the southern countries, the other shores of the Mediterranean, whether it is the North Africa or key countries in Africa, and I think in that sense it's telling of this need of developing a new strategic vision and really also how to do diplomacy. I think main takeaway of what works of the Mattei planning so far, I think, is again a new way of engaging, a new type of diplomacy, maybe less judgmental, less, sometimes I have to say also less principle based, you know, in the sense that you deal only on common interest and you leave apart other things, and you don't enter in issues that might be perceived as interferes in domestic affairs. And also a lot of pragmatism, a lot of focus on concrete projects. So again, that I think, especially this last part on focus on concrete projects, it's not, I mean, it's something to learn from. So again, I think that we should try to really work also on these members, states that they have been in that, members of the Atlantic Alliance which have tried actually to give some responses. Italy is one of them. I don't think that, once again, the Mattei plans gives all the responses, but again, it's a step in that direction, and also it reveals somehow the discomfort of some members of the Atlantic Alliance that do not feel, let's say, heard, that their like concerns, security concerns in this, are not well heard enough, maybe compared to northern members of the alliance. Thank you.
Please.
Yeah, briefly. I will just add and echo a few points. First of all, I agree with what Abdulaziz said in regards to the ICI. It's a political agreement rather than security. But I'd also add that it's not even military. In short, there has not been military engagement on a high level, neither on defense minister's level, since the launch of the initiative. In 20 years, the ministers of defense never met from ICI as well as NATO. That's one thing. On a political level, the foreign ministers of ICI probably met last time with their NATO counterparts in that level pre-COVID. And if I'm not mistaken, it was in the inauguration of the center in 2017. That was the last time. So I think we need very much further military engagement. Houthis, we've been fighting them with a coalition led by Saudi Arabia for a long time. And we spoke to you about it, yet nobody supported it at the time. And yet countries within the alliance stopped exporting weapons to Saudi Arabia. That's just to keep in mind. And now the Houthis came back to bite you. In short, and I just wrote it here, what and why is there for cooperation between NATO and ICI, but I think where we need a lot of work is the how, in short.
Thank you very much. I think this session has illustrated for us many things, including the complexity of the issues across this vast region, the different perspectives, and the considerable gap between where we are today and where we need to go in terms of engagement across the Mediterranean. And hopefully that's something that NATO can focus on as it also concerns itself with the war in Europe. Please join me in thanking all of our speakers. This has really been a terrific conversation. And we have another one. We have another one to come. But allow me also a special thanks, Alessandro, to you and to your team here. It's always a pleasure to be here at your events. So thank you so much again, and for the hospitality. And now it's really a great pleasure of mine to turn over, to introduce and to turn over the floor to a friend of mine, Charles Kupchan. who is here. We see each other frequently, but in different settings, and he's always extraordinarily interesting to listen to. Charlie Kupchan is Senior Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, also a professor at Georgetown University, and he's very kindly agreed to share some special thoughts with us. So, Charlie, please. Thanks very much.
Can I dive right in? Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, sir, for your warm hospitality, and it's delightful to be here. I only have 5 or 10 minutes to offer a few moments at this 75th anniversary of NATO, and I will start off with what I think is a very positive, upbeat assessment of where we are 75 years in to what may be the world's most formidable military alliance. And then I'll end with those issues that are out there that keep me up at night, that I think NATO has to grapple with moving forward. In terms of where we are at year 75, the fact that we're celebrating 75 is a big deal. Most alliances in history dissolve when the threat that created them disappears. But instead of dissolving at the end of the Cold War, NATO stayed together, it took on new missions, it expanded, it went out of area, it adapted its purposes, it remained or sort of transformed into an all-purpose vehicle for defending the collective interests and values of the North Atlantic democracies. And in many respects, it has enjoyed a revival, a renewal as a consequence of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, both 2014 and 2022. And I think it's safe to say that NATO today is more salient, more solid, more vigorous than it was even during the Cold War. And I think that's in part because the Cold War became normal. There was Ostpolitik, there were relations between NATO members and the Soviet Union. There was dialogue. Now I think there isn't a sense of normalcy. There is here in Europe, especially if you live in a frontline state like a Baltic country or Poland, there is an existential fear that wasn't there before, and that animates politics and strategy among NATO countries. And it has also led to a situation in which I think for the first time in NATO's history, Europe is pushing the United States. Right, Bob Kagan in 2003 or 4 or 5, after the U.S. invasion of Iraq, said Americans are from Mars and Europeans are from Venus. You Europeans don't understand geopolitics. You've checked out of history. Well, who is it that's now asking for F-16s and attacks on Russian territory and tanks and more missiles? It's Europe that is pushing the United States. It's the United States that in some respects has been more cautious. That's new, that's different. We're now at a situation in which 2/3 of NATO members will be at or above the 2% benchmark on spending on GDP. That's very different than only a few years ago. We've been through a series of elections that we thought might crack the consensus. But apart from Orban in Hungary and now the new government in Slovakia, elections haven't really cracked the solidarity that emerged in February of 2022. We have a new government in the UK. I doubt their position on Ukraine is going to change. We will have a new leadership in the French National Assembly, maybe no leadership, but that election is unlikely to change France's course. Here in Italy, we had a government elected, and many people worried that Prime Minister Meloni was going to drift away on Ukraine. Far from it. She has been a solid participant in the coalition that emerged to help Ukraine defend itself. Trump could be reelected in a few short months. Do I think he's going to pull out of NATO? No. Why? Because Trump asks morning, noon, and night, what's in it for me? And when he asks, what's in it for me by dismantling the Western alliance, I think the answer is going to be not very much. He may try to get a deal with Putin on Ukraine. He may beat on Italy to spend more on defense. In fact, I'm sure he will. You can look forward to that if he wins. But I think that the changes, the revitalization that we've seen in the NATO alliance over the past couple of years is here to stay. At least as long as Putin is alive, and that could be quite some time. And in a Europe that has been geopolitically redivided, in a Europe in which there is now an 800-plus mile border between NATO member Finland and Russia, I don't think we're going to see NATO lose the salience and the sense of urgency that it enjoys today. So that's all good news. I think this week in Washington there is a lot to celebrate and a lot to be proud of when it comes to the achievements that the alliance has. Three quick thoughts on the other side of the ledger. What do I worry about? What do I think NATO, as a community of values and common interests, is going to need to tackle in the coming months and near-term years? Number one, Ukraine. Right? Ukraine has been a remarkable success story. It is still standing. This really was a Goliath versus David story, and a country that is much smaller has been able to hold the line and is still in control of somewhere around 81% of its territory. My best guess is that when the fighting stops, historians will judge this to be an irreversible strategic defeat for Russia. And that's because, in my mind, Russia has lost Ukraine. Somebody will write a book called Who Lost Ukraine, and it will be a short book because it will be one page with the word Vladimir Putin on it, because he turned a divided, fractured country without a strong national identity into a country that wants nothing to do with Mother Russia. And it's hard for me to imagine that Ukraine will ever be reintegrated into some kind of Russian sphere of influence. How we get to that outcome, I think, remains unclear. And in my mind, NATO has a policy toward Ukraine, which is to give arms to Ukraine and give money to Ukraine and help it defend itself, but it doesn't have a strategy. And by that I mean it doesn't have a set of war aims that are in equilibrium with available means. And we continue to talk about Ukraine winning, about Ukraine launching an offensive next year, taking back Donbass, maybe taking back Crimea. It ain't going to happen. I think the best we can hope for is a Ukraine that is able to hold the line, to build defense in depth, to protect and rebuild the 81% of the country that is still under Kyiv's control. What are the chances that Ukraine, which is having difficulty getting more troops onto the battlefield, this mobilization order that just passed through the Ukrainian parliament, that they can put in the field the sources, the manpower needed to win? I think it's remote. And at some point in the not too distant future, we need to have an open conversation about how to realign our war aims with available means. And I think that ultimately means redefining success not as defeating Russia and expelling Russian troops from every inch of Ukrainian territory, but ensuring that the Ukraine that is there today emerges as a successful, defensible, prosperous, liberal democracy. That's the best way to defeat Ukraine. And if we don't shift our aspirations, if we don't match our resources to our objectives, I do fear that we imperil Ukraine. Because ultimately Putin wants either to defeat Ukraine or to subjugate Ukraine by turning it into a failed state. And if this war goes on for 10 years and thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of more Ukrainians die, and Russia keeps pummeling Ukraine's energy infrastructure, right? We're told now that 50% of the electrical grid is down. This is going to be a dark and cold winter for Ukrainians. Putin might succeed in turning it into a failed state. And that's why ultimately I think we need a strategy for defending the Ukraine that is still Ukraine and ensuring that emerges as a stable, defensible country for the long haul. Second issue, enlargement and Ukrainian membership. I fear that ever since 2008, when the NATO declaration at the Bucharest summit said that Georgia and Ukraine will be members of NATO, we just keep mumbling about it and moving forward, and we haven't really had a serious debate about whether it makes sense. And it seems to me that we are not going to war currently to stop the war in Ukraine, to defend Ukraine, because we have decided that we don't want to go to World War III over Ukraine. I think that's the right decision. But if President Biden and Prime Minister Meloni and Chancellor Schroeder and Emmanuel Macron have all decided that we're not going to World War III for Ukraine, then why do we want to extend a security commitment to Ukraine that would obligate us to go to World War III to defend it? So there are some very difficult questions about Ukrainian membership that we need to address honestly and openly. And I don't think it makes sense just to say, well, we said we're going to bring them in 2008, so we're just going to keep muddling along down that road. My final comment, this is off script, I guess you might say, in that it really has nothing to do with NATO's bread and butter. It has nothing to do with aircraft carriers and military strategy and defense spending. But I am much more worried about the internal threat to Western democracy than I am about the external threat. Right? I lie awake at night worrying not about Vladimir Putin, but about Donald Trump. I watched that debate last week between President Biden and Donald Trump and was crying. I mean, this is a political emergency. And I fear that on both sides of the Atlantic, our political centers are on life support. And we see these elections take place, and one of them comes out to the far right or the far left, and the other one, well, maybe this political center is going to come back. But the trend line is not good. And I feel a little bit like we're focusing all this energy on Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, on defending Ukraine, on Gaza, and that's all as it should be, because these are very serious security threats. But I also think that we do ourselves no favor by not addressing more frontally the internal threat posed by a liberal populism. Because if our political centers continue to erode, and if the liberal populists take power, a liberal populace on both sides of the Atlantic, we in a heap of trouble. So, quite honestly, and this will be my last point, if Joe Biden called me tonight and said, any last-minute thoughts on the agenda for Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of this week, I'd say, yeah, let me just add a few. Number one, what are our workers going to do in the next 10 years to earn a living wage? What are Americans who used to work at General Motors and make $32 an hour, and they're now working at Walmart and Amazon for $12 an hour, and they can't feed their family? What are we going to do about that? What are we going to do about immigration? Because many Americans feel that we've lost control of our borders. And to some extent we have, which is why Biden did something that he never thought he would do, which is issue an executive order to shut down the border whenever you have more than, I think, I can't remember the number, come across in any given time frame. Number 3, we need to regulate social media and figure out what AI is going to do to our populations, because so far they've done more harm than good. This is not what you normally discuss at a NATO summit, but I do think that given that NATO is about the defense of the liberal democratic world, we have no choice but to address these defining issues, because the threat from within, for now, is more grave and more urgent than the threat from outside. I will stop there.
Thank you very much, Charlie.
I couldn't agree more. And it's years that I have the same thoughts. And I think that NATO has a direct interest in artificial intelligence. As you know, we have a quote-unquote brand new division at the headquarters, which is innovation, hybrid, and cyber. And one of the things that is urgent to do is to start discussing on a treaty on military uses of AI with major interested parties, including Russia and China, now. Because these things are quick, and time is running very fast, and they are not controlled by governments. So it's really, something serious. And the internal threat, yes, because the social structure has gone in the US and in many European countries. So I understand perfectly well why the two presidential candidates are so interested in reconstructing the United States, each one in, his own way. Now I'm very pleased to introduce you the last speaker of this long half day. It's Honorable Giulio Tremonti. He is the chairman of the Italian Committee on European Community Affairs. And he's somebody who has not only had governmental positions, which is easy, but somebody who has continued to think despite, the chaotic way Italian politics function. So it is my great pleasure to introduce you, Honorable Giulio Tremonti. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. Train has left the station and no one can stop it. There are only 3 or 4 months to go, perhaps less before the catastrophe. This was said a few days ago to a Swiss weekly, Die Woche, by the Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić. Talking about trains on April 15 of this year, the press learned that an accord has been signed between Leonardo Military Industry and the Italian railway network. An accord regarding military mobility. Trains departing from 2 different stations. The Russian station is people with dystopian despots who believe that their future lies in their own past and in our present. The European station was until yesterday peopled with sleepwalking globalists and with tourists of history. The European Union has only just realized the risk. But let me start from the first station. Hitler's Mein Kampf enjoyed a wide diffusion, but was seriously considered until it was too late. Putin's Mein Kampf was published in the Financial Times a few years ago, and time has now come to take it seriously. Putin tells that Russia's future lies in the past, a past consisting of the Russian history, soul, traditions, and borders, borders that are now European borders. On June 14 this year, Putin said it's evident that the entire system of Euro-Atlantic security is crumbling before our eyes. And consequently, we need a vision for the Eurasian continent for the future. We don't know whether Putin has read George Orwell, 1984, or not. More probably that Putin has read Dostoevsky's Demos. But anyway, in Orwell 1984, the book says that Eurasia is the Northern Asia, the continental Europe, Turkey, and Central Asia. Eurasia will be one of the three different superpowers, Eurasia, Oceania, and Eurasia, fighting with one another to dominate the world. In a scenario of this kind, even if the war in Ukraine were to come to an end, Korean style, it's probable that Putin insists on the war, on the aggression, in other way and in other places. Consequently, as a vital option, Europe must change its policy. Some reports have been written now concerning the European future, starting from the economic side, starting from the market. Today, and for present time and for the future, the right side of history for Europe is not the economic one, but only the political side. European policy until today was a policy based on slow, progressive enlargement from west to east. Today, however, Russia is working on its own enlargement, albeit on enlargement in the opposite side, from east to west. So, for the European Union, it's not longer time to be working on the old style enlargement. What necessary for Europe is union, total union, from north to south, from west to east. Union means all in, consequently postponing for all new member states the so-called European national homework. It's not easy to do this, but it is absolutely necessary. If we continue with the gradual, benign, paternalistic, hostile enlargement, it would be too easy for Russia to introduce elements of division, of competition, of delusion between member states, as some brought on board, others remaining on the waiting list. This approach could be, this phenomena could be dramatic in the Balkans. Balkans, we produce more history than they can consume locally, and so they export it. Churchill and Sarajevo. Obviously, all in requires a change in the constitutional structure of Europe. The adoption requires the adoption of a new voting system that will obviously cancel the present veto system. Not only the constitutional structure, also the political software needs to change, respecting traditions in the East, traditions that are not yet in line with the perfect democratic modernity of the West. This is a time when union is of greater value than the perfection. In his address at Budapest University, looking at the Danube River, Pope Francis spoke of bridges as a symbol of the necessary union of the European cultures. It is for all these reasons that it is both necessary and possible today, more than ever before, necessary and possible for the new Europe to become, once again, as it has been in the past, the master of its own destiny rather than a victim of a catastrophic scenario. Thank you very much.
My dear friends, this is the end of the session. I hope you have enjoyed a full afternoon on the 8th of July. So it's an important endeavor. I thank you for your presence here. I think it has been an interesting discussion with so many points. We should need much more time when we discuss these things, because there are so many important issues that we are not able to grasp completely. As Ahmad was saying before, we can't speak about the war in Gaza in 5 minutes, There's much more than that. Anyway, thank you very much. It has been a very interesting day. I thank you. Grazie mille.